The Dallas Cowboys made a big trade before the NFL deadline, kind of. We'll break it down on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are breaking down the trade for Jonathan Mingo from the Carolina Panthers. The Cowboys give up a 4th-round pick in 2025. They get back Mingo and a 2025 7th-round pick. We'll talk about the compensation here in a little bit, but Landon, let's talk about the player. Why do you think the Cowboys decided to make this move right now?
Well, I've got the off-field reason and the on-field reason why I feel like they.
Well, let's do the off-field one because I honestly I don't think it's a bad point.
Look, I mean, it doesn't feel like coincidence that the almost the same breath in which Jerry Jones announces that Dak Prescott is going on IR, that he announces the trade for Jonathan Mingo. I think, look, it seems like a really expensive distraction from, and I said it when I made a Locked On Now and put it up on the YouTube channel. You guys go check it out. I basically suggested that the Cowboys made a move to change the narrative about the Cowboys and to change the course of the Cowboys season this year, and this will accomplish neither. I think that the Jonathan Mingo trade makes a lot of sense, on a 10,000-foot non-compensation included view. And I think, he makes sense in the sense that you are struggling to get yak from your receivers, right? To produce yardage after catching the ball from the receiver core that you have. That's what Mingo will hopefully do for you, right? He's a guy who can also come in and play special teams. But, I think that ultimately it's hard not to feel like they overpaid for a wide receiver that they liked coming out of the draft in order to kind of distract and make Cowboys fans, feel better about the way that the season is going.
Yes, I think that's part of it, right? Like just to have some kind of other news rather than talking about the loss on Sunday and the fact that Dak Prescott's going to be going on our IR, which again, we've got to talk about later in the show. But I wanted to talk about Mingo, the prospect, right? Because he was somebody that we talked about prior to the 2023 draft. He was a 30 visit from the Cowboys, 6'2", 220 pounds, ran a 4.46. I believe he had one of the fastest flying 20-yard times in the class. Insane athlete, 39.5-inch vertical, 129-inch broad jump. Like, this is an athlete. But the reason why I don't want to say fell to the second round because that's not true. I mean, he got drafted at the top of the second round. The reason he was picked there is because he was a not super productive player at Ole Miss, but you were betting on the upside. He happens to go to a situation where he's playing with a rookie quarterback in year one. Bryce Young obviously struggles this year. First couple of games plays with Bryce Young, and then it's Andy Dalton. Last couple of weeks has not played very much. It certainly wasn't a situation where it was great for him to develop, but he also hasn't shown a lot so far to date in the NFL either.
It's a lot of unknown here, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is a guy, I mean, honestly, you go back and you look at Ole Miss almost has a University of South Carolina type, all their wide receivers seem to come out the same, right? They all these athletic freaks that are all like Des Bryant sized, like 6'2", 220. We know the body type, physical, difficult to bring down when they have the ball in their hands. And Lane Kiffin likes to find ways to get these guys the ball, and then that's the offense, right? It's short passes to these guys and then have him run through these secondary players, right? And I think that he gets he gets drafted. He goes to Carolina. You laid it out, right? Carolina's in a complete rebuild situation. They have a rookie quarterback, and then a veteran quarterback who isn't very good. They've got an offense that's discombobulated to say the least. There isn't exactly
two different coaching staffs.
That's
two
right.
different offensive coordinators. Yep.
In 3 years, right? Like
3
in
years.
almost no time, right? So, I think that ultimately what you're banking on is that this is a guy who went to an organization that just simply didn't have the resources or the time to develop him the way that he needed to be developed.
Right.
However, there's also the case that tons of these guys come out every year and just don't get developed, right? And like
most of them don't.
Right. So I do think that there is a large amount of upside. If they can figure something out with this guy, there is a big amount of upside in what he can be with as a player. If he can be a contributor on your offense, I think the problem is getting him onto the field on a regular basis, and having him being able to function as a normal wide receiver. And frankly, Marcus, it's a problem that we're familiar with because we're having that problem with our current wide receiver core.
Yeah.
So that's the little concerning part about it. But it does feel like the difference between Mingo and Brooks or Tolbert or some of these other guys is that I feel like Mingo has significantly more upside because of his athleticism.
Yeah. So one of the things is we've known that the Cowboys have been hunting this type of wide receiver for several years now, right? In 2022, they were really interested in Treylon Burks. He ended up getting drafted ahead of where they picked. 2023, Quentin Johnson was somebody that the Cowboys really liked. He ended up getting picked ahead of where the Cowboys drafted. Mingo, obviously, somebody in 2023. So this has been a type. On top of that, you go to Jonathan Mingo's mock draftable. His number one athletic comparison is Ryan Flournoy, which I feel like is kind of funny. They've been wanting one of these big athletic guys that can make plays after the catch. Now, that's my next question is, where do you use it? Because at Ole Miss, most of his production came from as a slot receiver that you used on a lot of over routes where you can use his size and athleticism. Does that fit with Dallas when you have CeeDee Lamb who plays in the slot, Jalen Tolbert who can play in the slot a little bit? Like, where do they line him up?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have to figure something out with him being able to take snaps outside as well, right? Like, I mean, he's not developed as a receiver the way you'd like, and that's kind of makes playing on the outside even more difficult, right? Because you have to deal with more press coverage and just all the aspects of playing further away from the ball makes it more difficult. But I mean, that's something that they're going to have to do. Like, the good news is, like you mentioned, CD and Tolbert and these other guys have experience kind of moving around and really to facilitate CD getting more touches, right? To facilitate putting CD where you need him in order to make plays. I think that, what you may see is that CD might take an uptick more outside. And you see him kind of sliding inside and taking some snaps there. We'll just have to see different formations where they line him up in different spots. But, that's why I think it's going to be a difficult time to kind of, easily fit him into the offense this season, right? Because I do think you probably need an off season to kind of develop him into the outside receiver or at least have him learn the offense well enough so that he can move around opposite of CeeDee Lamb. Now, in order to get him on the field, you're actually having to, center him because you got to make sure that he understands the play that he's running, and you're moving around your star wide receiver to kind of compensate for that. I'm sure they have plans for this situation. I'm sure they have specific stuff that they want to use him for that we just don't know about yet. But I think, it is a good question, with his limited ability and his limited skill set as a route runner. How are they going to deploy him in such a way that still kind of utilizes CeeDee Lamb the way that we need to?
A couple other things. We know that Brandon Cooks is at least close to coming back, right? And now with Mingo being added into the lineups, you've got CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert, Mingo, Turpin. That's 5 receivers right there. You also have Jalen Brooks and Ryan Flournoy on the roster. That's 7 receivers. Obviously, well, they're going to move on from at least one of these guys. Who is going to be on the outside looking in here?
I guess Brooks. I guess. I don't know. I mean, I think Flournoy makes more sense because you just have not seen anything from him yet. I mean, I like his upside and I'm excited about the player and I wouldn't want to necessarily cut him, but blocked incredibly in the game on Sunday.
Yeah.
But I just don't know where else you're going to go. I mean, I think Flournoy to me makes some sense because they're very similar players, right? So maybe, but I mean, he also just got drafted, so it's like, I guess it's Brooks, but I mean, I don't feel great about it. But I mean, I understand because you got to cut somebody.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's both, to be honest. And just go with those 5 moving forward. It's tough for Brooks, who's made some plays this year, can contribute on special teams. And Flournoy is a rookie. I doubt they're going to give up on a rookie, but it's an interesting wide receiver room, to say the least. Lena, let's talk about the compensation when it came to trading for Jonathan Mingo, because I have some thoughts. Let's get to that next. This episode is brought to you by GameTime. I absolutely love GameTime. It's the only ticketing app that I use when I want to see my favorite teams play. GameTime picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. One of my favorite parts of GameTime is that you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Plus, they have the lowest price guarantee, or GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. Your purchase is also covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime picks. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? Game time. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are discussing the trade of Jonathan Mingo from the Panthers to the Cowboys. Let's discuss the compensation. The Cowboys give up a 2025 4th-round pick. They get back Mingo in a 7th. What are your reactions on the trade?
It was too much. I mean, I think it was around too much, right? Like, I think, and it's not just because, you have all those 5th rounders, right? And that you didn't necessarily want to give up a 4th. It felt like, considering he isn't going to be much of a contributor this season, and you don't really know. I mean, he will contribute in some way, but he won't be like necessarily a playmaker. I hope. Well, hopefully he will be, but I don't think it's fair to anticipate that this season. And you don't really know what you're getting beyond that. I think it should have been more of a flyer than it was, right?
Yeah.
I think that Carolina took advantage of the fact that Jerry wanted to make something happen, and he probably kicked it up half a round more than he should have. And ultimately that's the compensation we got. Look, the Cowboys are getting a 7th round pick back from this, but ultimately it's it's like a pick swap in some ways, but not really, because I mean the difference
Big
between
swap.
the 4th and the 7th is pretty serious. And I just think that for even with the devalued level of late round picks, I just think it was a little bit rich for a guy that you're not getting too much guarantees of the contribution. And that's still keeping in mind that the Cowboys traded a 4th round pick for a backup quarterback who we've yet to see play. So
yeah, exactly. Let's actually start with that. There's a big difference between this trade and the Trey Lance trade, because I know everybody's
absolutely.
kind of, I've seen some terrible tweets about, hey, the Cowboys have given up 4th round picks and guys that won't play. Jonathan Mingo is going to play one way or another this year.
Yeah.
He's played like 100 special team snaps this year. He could play right away, even if it's only on special teams. Now, is it ideal to trade away a 4th round pick for a special teams player? Absolutely not. But that's the difference, where Trey Lance is buried on your bench as an inactive player each week. Mingo is going to help you one way or another. There's also a difference in cost control, right? The Cowboys got 2 years out of Trey Lance. They're getting 2.5 out of Jonathan Mingo. So there's a little bit of a difference there. I also agree with you that they overpaid. I think if this was a 5th round pick and the Cowboys give up one of their 4 5th round picks to get Mingo in a 7th, nobody's batting an eye, right? But this is not the same as trading for DeAndre Hopkins on a 1-year rental when you're paying him $7 million a year. It's not the same as Amari Cooper, who's on a 1-year deal that you're trading a 3rd round pick for, like the Bills did. Deontay Johnson, the NFL just does not want Deontay Johnson in their locker room, and that's why he's bounced around the league so much. Teams couldn't give him away any cheaper over the last 2 years. Again, all of this to say that the Cowboys have overpaid for Mingo. But I do want to talk about the devaluing of day 3 picks, because it seems like day 3 picks have never been less valuable. In an era where GMs hoard draft picks, you look at what day 3 picks have been doing the last couple of years, and you look at the quality of like early day 3 picks, we're just not getting the same talent coming out of the college ranks as we did 5, 10, 15 years ago.
It's what NIL has done to these guys' careers, right? In the sense that I'm not as desperate to get out of college and start making NFL money, because I'm maybe making pretty decent money as a junior in college at, a middle ranked team in the NCAA. So we're not having the same kind of overwhelming underclassmen classes coming out, which is, shallowing the depth of these draft classes. So I think that, NIL has had an effect. It's found the effect has found its way up to the NFL, and I think it's the way it's reflecting is just kind of a general shallowing of these draft classes, and even more specifically the undrafted free agent classes, right? Because there's less of these guys kind of slipping through the cracks now that they're not just coming out desperate to try to make some kind of cash after being in a practically slave labor situation in the NCAA before the NIL rules changed.
Yeah, and I want to look specifically at the wide receiver position. You look at the guys that are coming out now that are either really old. We're talking about day 3, really old prospects, or really young guys that have some like major immaturity concerns. For example, like a Tez Walker coming out of North Carolina, where North Carolina basically told him, hey, go pro. We don't want you anymore. Javon Baker, another one from UCF, who Alabama and Georgia basically told him, hey, get off our roster. When you have 8 receivers that were drafted in the fourth round or top of the 5th round this year, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them have 2 or fewer yards on the season. Like, those guys aren't contributing at all. And this is not to try to make this Mingo trade look better. It's just that you're not getting the same talent in those rounds as we're accustomed to seeing.
I think we're kind of exiting an era in which, you would get just a unbelievable amount of I think specifically you mentioned it, wide receiver and maybe even quarterback talent coming out of these classes. Because there was the change in the 7-on-7 rules in high school, and what that did to the supercharging of skill sets for these kids going into college, as far as running routes and defending routes. I think that it had a similar effect with cornerbacks as well, right? And for a while we were kind of in the golden age of skill set drafts, right, where these guys come into college already skilled. they're ready to leave college and play snaps, pretty close, if not right away. And then there was a class beneath them of young guys that are hungry to get out. Now that you've got the NIL situation, it's allowed kids this option to stay in college a little bit longer to make more money.
Yeah.
And ultimately all it does is it kind of spreads that out a little bit more. So the numbers are not quite, and I wouldn't be shocked if after a couple of years, it started to kind of build back up to where it was as things kind of even out. But as we're still kind of dealing with the chaos of the NIL, it's going to make for some very uneven draft classes, right? As 1 year we'll have a whole bunch of people coming out, and next year, you've got half a dozen juniors that in a normal year would come out, but because they're making $1 million or whatever it is in NIL money this year, they decided they'll wait an extra year to help their draft stock and make more money coming out. So it's just changed the angles on a lot of this stuff. And the results temporarily, at least right now, are that the draft classes are coming out a little bit shallower, especially in the wide receiver market, like you mentioned.
Last thing I want to mention, the Cowboys are projected to have 10 picks in next year's draft. Again, they don't lose the number of picks because they end up getting back a seventh. Obviously, the value is different, but they're going to need those picks to replenish the roster. But I'm telling you right now, 10 draft picks are not making the 2025 Dallas Cowboys roster, right? So if you can start to spread out those assets a little bit, we'll see. Now, if Mingo is a bad player and he gets cut by next year, it's a terrible trade. But if he comes in and he's your wide receiver 4 and he helps you out on special teams and you're able to kind of move some things around, I think that's how this works.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair expectation for what this should be, right? Is a guy that comes in as wide receiver 4, hopes to get some wide receiver 3 snaps. He's going to be a special teams player. Maybe he makes a big play for you later in the season. That those are all fair goals to hope for this guy. And then the hope is that you give him an offseason and kind of continue to learn the wide receiver position, and then you get a different player coming into 2025.
Yeah. All right, we haven't even talked about the Dak Prescott injury news. We're going to talk about that and the possibility of Trey Lance starting some games moving forward. We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. This month is all about gratitude. So we want to shout out some people that helped us get where we are. I want to shout out my 7th grade social studies teacher, David Bona, who pushed me to help do some media stuff, to do some football stuff. So shout out to you, David Bona. There's also another person that we don't think enough in our lives, and that's ourselves. Sometimes it's hard to remind ourselves that we are trying our best to make sense of everything in this crazy world. That isn't easy. But here's a reminder to send some thanks to the people in your life, including yourself. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. You can download that podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube.
Real quick, Landon, can I also just say NFC Squad? We also do a show at AFC and NFC Squads. The NFC Squad show will show up on our feed as well. So if you guys haven't had a chance, please check those out. They're a lot of fun. I have been taking a lot of abuse, unfortunately, because of the Cowboys results, though. So of course, throwing that out there.
Yep, of course. Let's talk about the Dak Prescott injury news. There was a report yesterday that the hamstring injury is worse than they feared. We had a feeling coming out of that game on Sunday that it was pretty bad. Jerry Jones mentioned that Dak is basically going to go on the injured reserve list, meaning that his next game that he'll be eligible to play will be on December 9th against the Bengals. What were your thoughts on the injury news?
Well, I mean, obviously it's kind of what we were not hoping but expecting, right?
Yeah.
Because of just the way the thing went down. I was obviously watching the game tape last night and saw the play in which it happened. It sounds like from what he's saying, it happened on the scramble before the throw.
Yeah.
Is when he started to feel it. You see it a little bit on tape. He kind of lunges forward and then he's on his stomach, right? And then he pops up, and then like as he's popping up, you could see it like you could see him kind of like stop, like he felt something, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously the next two throws, one was I cannot believe it was made completion to
Jalen
Brooks, in which it looks like Dak was shot in the middle of his throwing motion. And then another throw in which Dak, basically is like, I can't do this, guys. A screen attempt to, I think it was Ferguson, where he basically saw a defender coming at him and threw the ball into the dirt and was like, I can't move, So it's an unfortunate situation, obviously, and I think because it's your quarterback's legs. We spent all week talking about how we felt like he needed to run the ball more. I think everybody did. And unfortunately, this happens the first time he gets a couple of runs going. I think the Cowboys, obviously, based on all of the other things that we've been saying on this podcast for the last week and a half, I think the Cowboys need to be very, very careful here. Like, and there really isn't too much of a reason to, pardon the pun, rush him back, right? Because I think that there's not much to play for as far as, getting in the season. Maybe if somehow Cooper Rush goes undefeated in the next 3 weeks, and you win those games, maybe that changes the angles on how you approach this a little bit.
Well, I don't even know about that. I mean, I think if they go 2-2, right? Because then there'd be 5-7 at that point. And it's real. I mean, not realistic, but you would still have a chance. You run the table, you go 5-0, you get to 10-7. I think you have a chance, but anything less than that, I don't see.
Yeah, well, let me be clear. I'm not advocating to shut Dak down necessarily, right. But what I am saying is that Dak is the number one perpetrator at, not taking care of himself and rushing himself back too soon. So I think that the Cowboys, medical staff needs to err on the side of severe caution that he's not going to put himself out there in a game situation when he's not ready, and then suddenly have a sports hernia injury, right? Like, that's the kind of thing that I'm concerned about. So I do think that there's, but my point being, like, there is a rush back to play so you can, perform and, be in the playoff race. And then there's a rush back. There's a getting back to play because it's the natural timeline of health. I think if the Cowboys lose 2 games or more in this next stretch while he's gone, I think they should be doing the second more than the first. They shouldn't be trying to rush him back for a long shot playoff run that will include him having to play hero ball, which will likely get him re-injured if he's not healthy.
Yeah. I also want to say I am not opposed to the idea of them shutting him down for the season. However, ideally, if he could come back the last 3 games or so, and it just kind of, you don't want your quarterback to miss, basically in half a year, right? Or whatever, it would be actually more than that, right? 3/4 of a year. Get him back, at least get him so he's not thinking about the injury going into the offseason. But I think the idea of him playing anytime soon is off the table. Now, Jerry Jones did say that Cooper Rush is going to start in week 10, but he also said that Trey Lance is going to play, which I find fascinating. How quickly do you think they're going to go to Trey Lance here?
Oh, I mean, I think he's going to play. I mean, I think he should play. I don't think that necessarily means like, he'll get a series like in the first game or anything like even like that. I just think you should just start peppering him in for certain plays. Maybe get a red zone package going with him or something. That would make some sense to me, right? But I think at this point with no Dak, like it's evaluation time, man. Like I understand we're trying to like. There's much more of a balance here of like trying to see what you have on this roster and as as opposed to winning than there was previous to this, as far as I'm concerned. Like it's important to get some evaluation, especially on a guy in Trey Lance who you don't have for very much longer. So if you wanted to re-sign him or if you wanted to do something there, like it would be nice to get some information. And it has the added benefit of look, Cooper Rush is a great backup quarterback, and I think he can do some things, but it adds some dynamicism. I cannot ever say that word. It adds some explosiveness to your offense that is needed, right? That I think he can change the angles on things and keep it from being stale while Cooper Rush is the backup quarterback. That's the thing you have a concern with Cooper Rush, is that it's just too robotic and there's no explosiveness to it, right? And I think if you pepper in Cooper Rush, a Trey Lance there's some opportunity for that, and you get to evaluate him a little bit. And if it goes well, maybe you do play him a series or two.
Yeah. Again, there's not much in terms of like excitement here, but I think if you bring Trey Lance in, at least it gives us something else to talk about rather than the Cowboys being 3-8 or whatever, right? Yeah. It gives us some other storyline to follow. So big day for the Dallas Cowboys. We'll see. We'll see if they pull off any other moves at the deadline. On Wednesday's show, we're going to answer your Twitter questions. We're also going to talk about the offensive line a little bit and looking into the future with that unit. So make sure you tune in for that. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. He's at McCoolBCB. And we'll see you guys right back here tomorrow.